Miss Wilson? Alex? What the hell is going on here? My voice cut through the still air of the lecture hall, sharp, raw, almost unrecognizable. It wasn't just the words that rang out. It was the sheer disbelief, the sting of betrayal wrapping around every syllable. Alex jerked away from her, his lips still parted, as if my presence had stolen the breath from his lungs. Miss Wilson, Professor Wilson, adjusted the hem of her blouse with a slow, practiced ease, like she'd done this before, like my interruption was just an inconvenience, not a revelation. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud, erratic, drowning out the silence that followed. Alex looked at me then, his blue eyes wide with something that could have been guilt, could have been regret, but definitely wasn't surprise. His lips, the same lips that had whispered promises to me, trembled for half a second before settling into something else. Something colder. "Jess, what are you doing here?" he asked. Not I can explain. Not this isn't what it looks like. What am I doing here? I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head, trying to ground myself in the storm of emotions raging inside me. What am I doing here? Are you seriously asking me that right now? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I could ask you the same damn thing, Alex. I turned my gaze to Miss Wilson, Professor Wilson. She had the audacity to smirk, like this was some kind of twisted game, like I was just another student caught in something beyond her level of concern. Her fingers brushed against the sleeve of Alex's shirt, a subtle, possessive gesture that sent another jolt of nausea twisting through my stomach. "This isn't the time, Jess," Alex muttered, rubbing his forehead like I was giving him a headache. The sheer gall of it made my blood boil. "Not the time?" I let out a humorless laugh, stepping closer, forcing him to look at me. "When would be the right time, Alex? When you're done screwing your professor and feel like giving me a little update?" I could see his jaw tighten. He wasn't scrambling for excuses. He wasn't even trying to deny it. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't the first time. A cold shiver ran down my spine, drowning out the heat of my anger. How long? My voice was quieter now, but the weight of it pressed against my chest. Alex exhaled sharply, shifting his gaze away from me, and I saw it. The guilt that had been absent before. But it wasn't the guilt of a man who had been caught once. It was the resignation of someone who had been caught finally. "Jess." "How long?" "Miss." Wilson rolled her eyes and let out an amused little sigh. "Oh, come on, sweetheart. Do you really want to hear the answer to that?" Something in me snapped. "I wasn't talking to you," I bit out, turning back to Alex. "Answer me." He hesitated, and in that moment, I already knew. I already knew that this wasn't something new, that every late-night study session and extra credit meeting had been something else entirely. But I needed to hear it. I needed the words to break me completely, so I could stop holding on to hope, stop pretending that maybe this was just some kind of terrible, sick misunderstanding. "Since last semester," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The room spun. Last semester, months of lies, of stolen moments, of him coming home to me while sneaking off to be with her. I could barely breathe. Miss Wilson tilted her head, watching me like I was some kind of curious experiment, like she wanted to see how much more I could take before I broke completely. I swallowed hard, blinking back the burning in my eyes. "Wow," I breathed. Wow? I let out a small, broken laugh, shaking my head. "You really had me fooled, didn't you? The late-night texts, the stupid excuses. She's just helping me with research. God, I actually believed you." Alex looked away, but he didn't deny it. And that's when she decided to twist the knife. Let's be honest, darling," Miss Wilson purred, crossing her arms over her chest. "You really thought you could keep someone like Alex satisfied? Come now, She waved a hand, as if searching for the right word. "Cute in your little way, but you and I both know you were never enough for him." Something inside me shattered. I looked at Alex, waiting, hoping for him to step in, to tell her to shut the hell up, to deny it. He didn't. He just stood there, silent. And in that moment, I understood. I was nothing to him. Just a phase. just a temporary distraction until someone better came along. My hands clenched at my sides, my nails digging into my palms so hard I thought they might draw blood. "Okay," I said, voice steady, even as my world crumbled. "Okay." I turned on my heel and walked out, refusing to let them see me cry. But as soon as the door shut behind me, the tears came anyway. The first time I met Alex, I was 15, and the world still felt simple. It was one of those golden autumn afternoons, where the sun painted everything in warm hues, and the crisp air smelled like fallen leaves and fresh beginnings. I was walking home from school, my arms wrapped around a stack of books, when a sudden gust of wind sent my notebook flying across the pavement. I barely had time to react before someone darted forward, catching it mid-air like some kind of movie hero. "Got it," he grinned, holding it out to me. His brown hair was a mess, his blue eyes bright and teasing. I took the notebook, my fingers brushing against his for the briefest moment. "Thanks," I muttered, suddenly hyper-aware of the way my heart was hammering in my chest. "Anytime," he said, stuffing his hands into his hoodie pockets. "You're Jess, right? We have English together." That's how it started. Small, ordinary moments that wove themselves into something bigger. At first, we were just friends, passing notes in class, walking home together, laughing over the dumbest things. But then, something shifted. Maybe it was the way he started waiting for me after school every single day. Maybe it was the way his hand would linger just a little too long when he passed me a pencil. Or maybe it was that night at the winter formal when he finally kissed me. We had been dancing, well, more like swaying awkwardly, when he suddenly leaned in, his lips brushing mine so softly that for a second, I wasn't even sure it had really happened. But then he pulled back just enough to whisper, "I've wanted to do that for so long." And just like that, Alex became my whole world. We were inseparable after that. We spent our summers lying under the stars, making promises about the future. "We'll go to the same university," he had said one night, his fingers tracing patterns on my palm. "We'll get an apartment together, just the two of us. It'll be our place, our little escape from everything." I had believed him. Of course I had. We applied to the same university, got accepted together, moved into a tiny apartment that smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. It wasn't perfect. Half the time, we lived off instant noodles, and our furniture was mostly secondhand finds. But it was ours. I still remember our first night there. We sat on the floor, eating takeout straight from the boxes, laughing about how grown-up we thought we were. "This is it," he had said, pulling me into his arms. "Just you and me against the world, Jess." I had smiled, resting my head against his chest, letting myself believe that love, our love, was unshakable. The first year of university was a blur of stolen kisses between classes, late-night study sessions where we pretended to work, but mostly just talked about our dreams. We were that couple, the couple everyone envied. The ones who had been together forever, who still looked at each other like they were living in some kind of fairy tale. And for a while, it really did feel like a fairy tale. We had our fights, of course, every couple does, but they were small, insignificant things. Stupid arguments over dishes left in the sink or whose turn it was to buy groceries. They never lasted long. Because at the end of the day, Alex always knew how to make me laugh, always knew how to pull me back in with a whispered apology, with a kiss that erased whatever tension had been there. "You're my forever," he had told me once, his fingers tangled in my hair as we lay curled up on our tiny couch. And I had believed him. I had trusted him. I never once doubted that he loved me. Not until everything fell apart. At first, I told myself it was nothing. The changes were small, so small that I barely noticed them at first. A missed text here, a distracted, "Yeah, sure" there. The kind of things that happen in any long-term relationship, right? I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But then the gaps between us started to widen. It began with the late nights. Alex had always been studious, but suddenly he was obsessive about staying at the university. "I need to get ahead in my coursework," he'd say, shrugging it off like it was no big deal. "You know how competitive my program is." I did know, and I wanted to be supportive. So I ignored the sinking feeling in my stomach when he started canceling our usual study sessions together. "I'll be in the library late," he'd text over and over again, always late, always too tired to talk when he finally got home. At first, I waited up for him, kept his dinner warm, left the lights on, but eventually I stopped. There was no point in sitting there, staring at the door, waiting for someone who barely seemed to notice whether I was awake or not. And then there were the excuses. Sorry, babe, I forgot my phone was on silent. We had a last-minute group project meeting. My professor asked me to stay back and discuss an assignment. His words always sounded reasonable, always just enough to make me feel stupid for doubting him. But the problem was, his eyes never met mine when he said them. I started noticing other things too. Little shifts in his behavior that didn't make sense. The way he suddenly started dressing better for classes, swapping out his usual hoodies for button-downs, running his hands through his hair more often, checking his reflection before leaving. The way he stopped holding my hand when we walked through campus. The way he started answering my questions with vague, clipped replies, like he was constantly in a rush to be somewhere else. And then, of course, there was the perfume. It was faint at first, just a trace of something unfamiliar clinging to his clothes when he came home. A scent I didn't recognize. The first time I noticed it, I wrinkled my nose. Did you switch cologne? He had barely looked up from his laptop. Huh? No. Why? I hesitated. You just smell different. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe I walked past someone wearing too much perfume. Maybe. Maybe that's all it was. Or maybe it was the first crack in the foundation of everything we had built together. I tried to push the thoughts away, but doubt has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. It lingers in the back of your mind, whispering, twisting even the most innocent things into something darker. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. I started paying closer attention. I started watching the way his phone never left his side anymore, how he would angle the screen away from me, how his fingers would tighten around it whenever a notification popped up. I started noticing the way his schedule changed, how he suddenly had more office hours with his professors, more group projects that required his undivided attention. I started hearing the strain in his voice when he told me he loved me, because it didn't sound the same anymore. One night, I finally asked him about it. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the way we had been for weeks now. Him scrolling on his phone, me pretending not to notice how far away he felt. I took a deep breath. Alex, is something going on? He looked up, his brow furrowing. What do you mean? I swallowed. You've been different, distant. You're always at the university. You barely talk to me anymore. My voice faltered. I feel like I'm losing you. For a second, something flickered in his expression, something that looked almost like guilt, but then it was gone. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Jess, come on! You're overthinking this. I don't think I am. You are. His tone was sharper now, impatient. I'm just busy. That's all. College is stressful, you know that. I did know that, but stress doesn't make someone pull away from the person they love. Stress doesn't make someone lie. I pressed my lips together, nodding slowly, pretending to accept his words. But deep down, I knew. Something was wrong. And sooner or later, I was going to find out what. I don't remember how far I ran. I don't remember how many people I passed, how many turned their heads at the sight of a girl sprinting through campus with tears streaming down her face. All I knew was that I had to get away from that room, away from them, away from the suffocating weight of betrayal pressing against my chest like a heavy stone. At some point, my legs carried me to the back of the university, a quiet, forgotten corner of the campus where almost no one ever went. It was an open space, lined with old trees, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze, the kind of place where time felt slower, untouched by the noise of the outside world. And here, finally, I let go. I collapsed onto the grass, my knees hitting the cold earth, my hands gripping the fabric of my own sleeves as sobs tore through me. There was no holding it back anymore, no pretending to be strong. I had been a fool. A blind, trusting fool who had believed in forever. Every whispered I love you, every late-night promise, every dream we had painted together, It had all been a lie. He had been lying to me for months, kissing me with the same lips he used to kiss her. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I gasped for air between sobs, my fingers digging into the grass, as if grounding myself to the earth would somehow stop the pain from consuming me. But it didn't. Nothing did. Minutes passed, maybe more. My cries softened into quiet, shaky breaths, my shoulders still trembling from the weight of everything that had just unraveled before my eyes. And then, a voice, gentle, low, hesitant. "Oh, girl, are you all right? What happened?" My whole body stiffened. I turned sharply, wiping the tears from my face as my blurry vision focused on the source of the voice. There, sitting on a stone bench a few feet away, was a guy. I hadn't noticed him before, maybe because I'd been too lost in my own breakdown to realize I wasn't alone. He wasn't looking directly at me, at least not at first. His gaze was focused on the sketchpad resting on his lap, a pencil still poised between his fingers. He had been drawing. Now, though, he looked up, his dark eyes studying me with something that wasn't curiosity, but something softer. Concern, maybe. For a moment, I just stared at him, still catching my breath, still processing the fact that someone had witnessed my complete and total breakdown. My voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. I cleared my throat, trying to steady myself. "I'm fine." He didn't say anything right away, just tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, in a tone that was neither pushy nor invasive, he said, "You don't look fine." A weak, humorless laugh slipped out before I could stop it. "Yeah, well, I don't feel fine either." There was a pause. He set his pencil down, resting his arms on his knees as he studied me. Not in the way people do when they're just nosy, but in a way that made it seem like he actually cared. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. No pressure, no expectation, just an open invitation. And I don't know why. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or the rawness of my emotions, or the fact that he was a complete stranger with no stake in my life. But suddenly, I did. I wanted to talk. I wanted to pour everything out, so I did. I told him everything. About Alex. About Miss Wilson. About how I had walked in on them. How the truth had shattered every illusion I had built my life around. The words came tumbling out, messy and broken, like a dam bursting after holding back a flood for far too long. I wasn't even sure if I was making sense half the time, but he never interrupted, never looked away, never gave me that awkward, pitying expression people usually give when they don't know how to handle someone else's pain. He just listened, and that, somehow, made it easier. By the time I finished, my throat felt raw, my hands curled into fists against my lap. I expected him to say something, maybe try to offer some meaningless words of comfort like, "You deserve better," or "You'll get over it." But he didn't. Instead, after a long silence, he just sighed softly and said, "That's really messed up." I blinked. That was it? Not "you're strong." Not "he was never worth it." Just a simple, honest acknowledgement of how utterly terrible this whole situation was. And somehow, that meant more than any empty reassurance ever could. I let out a breath, my shoulders relaxing just a little. "Yeah," I mumbled. "It really is." Another pause. Then he shifted, glancing down at his sketch pad. "For what it's worth," he said, almost absently, "you're handling it better than most people would." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean by crying in the dirt for 20 minutes? A small, amused smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Hey, there are worse ways to cope." I let out another laugh, this time a real one. The first one I had managed since my world had come crashing down around me. For the first time in hours, the weight in my chest didn't feel quite as suffocating. And as I sat there, watching the wind rustle through the trees, listening to the quiet scratching of his pencil against paper, I realized something. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. The worst part about betrayal wasn't just the moment of impact, it was the aftermath. Because life doesn't pause for heartbreak. No matter how shattered I felt, the world kept spinning. Assignments still had to be turned in. Lectures still had to be attended. And unfortunately, those lectures included both Alex and her, Miss Wilson. I couldn't even say her name without feeling sick. She carried herself with the same smugness as before, as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just dismantled my entire relationship. She still stood at the front of the lecture hall, still spoke in that smooth, authoritative tone, still looked at me with the faintest hint of amusement whenever our eyes met. Like she enjoyed this, like she liked knowing she had won. And then there was Alex. He acted as if he barely even noticed me. He sat a few rows ahead, just close enough that I could see the way he slouched in his seat, his arm draped lazily over the desk. His phone was always in his hand, his thumb scrolling, his mind clearly elsewhere. Not once did he turn around. Not once did he acknowledge my presence. And that, more than anything, was what hurt the most. It was like I didn't exist to him anymore. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to focus on the professor's words instead of the churning storm in my chest. I could do this. I had to do this. I wasn't going to let them see me break. Not here. Not ever again. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost didn't notice when the lecture ended and the professor turned to introduce his assistant for the semester. All right, before we wrap up, I'd like to introduce someone who'll be helping out with this course. He'll be holding office hours and assisting with coursework, so don't hesitate to reach out if you need any help. The professor gestured toward the side of the room. This is Elias. I blinked. Wait, Elias? I turned my head just in time to see him step forward. The same guy from the back of the university, the one who had found me crying just a few nights ago. Elias. He was wearing a casual button-down now, sleeves rolled up, a lanyard hanging loosely around his neck. He looked a little different, more put together, more professional, but there was no mistaking that same calm expression, those same dark eyes that had studied me with quiet understanding. For a second, I thought I was imagining things, but then his gaze flickered across the room, landing on me, and he smirked, just slightly, just enough for me to notice. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. I barely heard whatever the professor was saying next. My brain was too busy short-circuiting over the absurdity of this situation. Of course he was an assistant here. Of course I was going to be seeing him regularly now, because apparently the universe had a twisted sense of humor. I hurriedly packed up my things, trying to slip out of the room before, "Hey, crying girl." I froze mid-step. Slowly, I turned around to see Elias standing there, arms crossed, looking far too amused for my liking. I scowled. "You did not just call me that." "I don't know your actual name," he said with a shrug. "You never told me." I groaned, slinging my bag over my shoulder. "It's Jess, and you're Elias." "So you were paying attention." I rolled my eyes. Hard not to when someone suddenly pops up as my professor's assistant. Elias smirked again. "Yeah, I got the job a few weeks ago. I was wondering when you'd notice." "Well, surprise." I motioned toward the door. "Anyway, I have to—" "Wait." He stepped in front of me, blocking my exit. "Hold on." I narrowed my eyes. "What?" His gaze flickered briefly toward the front of the room. Toward her. Miss Wilson was still talking to some students near the podium, but she must have sensed someone looking at her because she turned slightly, her eyes locking onto us. Her lips curled into a knowing smirk. I stiffened. Elias noticed. His head tilted slightly as he looked between us, something clicking in his expression. Then, in a completely unexpected move, he leaned in just a little closer to me and muttered under his breath, "Want to piss her off?" I blinked. "What?" He straightened up, casually resting a hand on the strap of his bag. "Your ex is here, she's here, and from what you told me, neither of them deserves to have the upper hand over you." I swallowed hard. "Yeah, and?" Elias's smirk deepened. "So let's make them think you're doing just fine without them." I stared at him, my brain struggling to catch up. "And how exactly do you suggest we do that?" "Simple." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a pack of gum, and popped a piece into his mouth. "We walk out of here together, casually, maybe laughing, maybe looking like we have something way more interesting to do than waste our time on them." I let out a small, incredulous laugh. "That's your big idea? Hey, you'd be surprised how effective a little pettiness can be." I exhaled sharply, glancing once more toward Alex and Miss Wilson. They weren't watching anymore, at least not directly, but I knew they had noticed. I could feel it. And for the first time in days, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt vindictive. I looked back at Elias. "Fine," I said, shouldering my bag. "But if this backfires, I'm blaming you." He grinned. "Deal." And with that, we walked out of the lecture hall together, side by side. I wasn't sure what I had just gotten myself into, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone. Lying in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, my thoughts twisted and tangled into knots I couldn't undo. Everything felt like a storm I was trapped inside. Alex, Miss Wilson, Elias. Their names rattled inside my head like ghosts haunting the edges of my consciousness, refusing to let me rest. I should have been sure about what I was feeling, but I wasn't. Anger? Of course. Betrayal? Undoubtedly. But there was something else, something lingering beneath the surface that I couldn't quite name. I turned onto my side, pulling my blanket up as if that would somehow shield me from the weight pressing against my chest. Alex had been my everything for years. He was supposed to be my partner, my best friend, the person I had built my future around. And yet, he had discarded me like I was nothing. Like all those late-night conversations, all those whispered dreams, all those shared moments had meant nothing. And her, Miss Wilson, she had smirked at me, mocked me. She had taken something from me and paraded it around like it was some kind of prize. And I hated that it still hurt, that it still burned inside me like an open wound that refused to close. I squeezed my eyes shut. And then, of course, there was Elias, the stranger I had spilled my heart out to, the stranger who had seen me at my absolute lowest and somehow hadn't run in the opposite direction. The stranger who had walked out of that lecture hall with me today, completely unbothered, completely amused, as if making Miss Wilson seethe with irritation was just another casual hobby of his. It should have felt stupid, immature, reckless, and maybe it was. But the truth was, I liked it. I liked knowing that for once, she was the one wondering what was going on, that for once, they were the ones watching me. I had spent the last week drowning in pain, feeling powerless, feeling like I had lost everything. But this was something, a shift, a change, a reminder that I could still choose what happened next. But was it the right choice? I sighed, rolling onto my stomach and burying my face into my pillow. What exactly was I doing? Was I really going to keep playing this game? Would it even lead anywhere? Because if I wasn't careful, this could all go terribly wrong. Elias wasn't part of this mess. He had nothing to do with my baggage, my past, my heartbreak. He was just there. And I had dragged him into this, whether I meant to or not. But the thing was, he hadn't minded. Not once had he acted like this was a problem. If anything, he seemed entertained. And I couldn't help but wonder why. Who was he really? Why had he been so willing to help me pull this ridiculous stunt? And why did I feel this itching curiosity to find out more about him? I groaned, flipping onto my back again. Maybe I was overthinking this. Maybe this wasn't some grand, complicated moral dilemma. Maybe it was just as simple as this. For the first time in days, I had felt something other than misery. For the first time in days, I had felt like I had some sort of control over my own story. So maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to have all the answers right now. Maybe, for once, I could just let things happen. No expectations, no attachments, just curiosity, just a little bit of fun. After all, Alex had done whatever the hell he wanted. So why shouldn't I? I wasn't tied to anyone anymore. I could do what I wanted. And right now, I wanted to see where this went. The days blurred into weeks, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the pain stopped feeling like a fresh wound. It was still there, buried deep beneath the surface, but it no longer consumed me. It no longer dictated every thought, every breath, every second of my day. And strangely enough, a big part of that was him, Elias. What had started as an unexpected encounter had turned into something more. We kept running into each other at the university, sometimes in lectures, sometimes in the hallways, sometimes just outside the library, where he always seemed to be sketching something in that ever-present notebook of his. At first, our conversations were light, casual, but somehow, somewhere along the way, They became frequent, then routine. And then, one evening, I found myself sitting across from him in a small coffee shop just off campus, laughing over something stupid he had said, feeling normal for the first time in what felt like forever. Okay, Elias said, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. But seriously, you're telling me you've never skipped a lecture just to sleep in? I scoffed. Unlike some people, I actually care about my education. He smirked, stirring his coffee lazily. I care. I just also care about getting a full 8 hours of sleep. I shook my head, grinning. You're impossible. Debatable. He took a sip of his drink. Anyway, tell me something real. I raised an eyebrow. Something real? Yeah, something about you that I don't know yet. He leaned back in his chair, watching me with that same unreadable expression he always had. You know, since we somehow skipped straight to the trauma dump stage of friendship. I rolled my eyes, but smiled. Something about the way he said friendship made my stomach twist, just a little. I ignored it. Fine, I said, pretending to think. Something real? I tapped my fingers against my mug. Okay. I once tried to teach myself how to skateboard because I thought it would make me look cool. Elias leaned in slightly, intrigued. And I fell face first onto the pavement within the first 10 minutes. He burst out laughing. Oh, that's tragic. I still have the scar on my knee, I said, lifting my leg slightly to show him. It's my reminder to never attempt anything that requires balance ever again. Elias smirked. That's a solid life lesson. I shrugged. Your turn. He thought for a second, then said, I once dyed my hair green because I thought it would make me look cool. I gasped. No way. Oh yeah. He nodded solemnly. Felt like a genius at the time. Then I looked in the mirror and realized I had made a terrible mistake. I laughed, shaking my head. I need to see a picture of this. Absolutely not. I demand photographic evidence. You'll never get it. We were still laughing when the waitress came by with the bill, and I realized that 2 hours had somehow passed without me noticing. It was nice. More than nice. It was easy. Being around Elias felt effortless in a way that nothing else had lately. There were no expectations, no pressure, no painful reminders of the past lurking in the background. Just laughter, just conversation, just him. And maybe that's why I kept saying yes whenever he suggested we hang out again. 1 time turned into 2, then 3, then 5. And before I knew it, I was seeing him more outside of the university than I did inside it. We went to a late-night diner after one of his assistant shifts, eating pancakes at 1 a.m. and making up ridiculous backstories for the people sitting around us. We wandered through bookstores, pointing out the worst book titles we could find. We sat by the river one evening, watching the city lights reflect off the water, talking about things we had never told anyone else before. And somewhere along the way, the ache in my chest stopped feeling so unbearable. Somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about them every second of the day. Somewhere along the way, I started feeling okay. Not completely. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, I could breathe again. And a small part of me, one I wasn't quite ready to acknowledge yet, wondered if he had something to do with that. Weeks had passed since Elias and I had begun spending more time together, and for a while, it felt like things were finally looking up. Our late-night conversations, shared laughter, and mutual support had become the highlight of my days. However, beneath the surface of this newfound happiness, a persistent issue gnawed at me. Ms. Wilson's blatant unfairness towards me in her class. Every assignment I submitted returned with harsh critiques and grades that didn't reflect the effort I'd invested. It was as if she was determined to see me fail. The final straw came when I received a paperback marked with a glaring D, accompanied by a note, lacks depth and understanding. I knew my work deserved better. Frustrated and disheartened, I met Elias at our usual coffee shop that evening. The cozy ambience, which once felt comforting, now seemed stifling under the weight of my academic troubles. Elias, I began, pushing the graded paper across the table to him. Look at this. It's like she's out to get me. He scanned the document, his brow furrowing. This is well written, Jess. There's no way this deserves AD. It's clear she's targeting you. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't know what to do anymore. Reporting her seems pointless. Who would believe me over a respected professor? Elias leaned in, his eyes intense. What if we expose her? Not just for this, but for everything. The inappropriate relationships with students, the abuse of power, everything. I looked at him, a mix of hope and apprehension swirling within me. But how? We need evidence, and even then it could backfire. He nodded thoughtfully. We'd have to be careful, gather undeniable proof, and ensure it reaches the right people. But if we succeed, we could put an end to her misconduct. The idea was risky, but the thought of holding Miss Wilson accountable ignited a spark of determination in me. Okay, I agreed. Let's do it. Over the next few weeks, Elias and I devised a plan. Elias, leveraging his position as a teaching assistant, began discreetly observing Miss Wilson's interactions with students, particularly those she seemed overly familiar with. He noted the students who frequently visited her office, the ones who received preferential treatment, and any behavior that seemed out of line. Meanwhile, I reached out to fellow students, carefully initiating conversations about Miss Wilson. I discovered that I wasn't the only one who felt unfairly treated. Some students hinted at inappropriate comments or gestures, while others spoke of sudden grade improvements after private meetings with her. One evening, a fellow student, Mark, confided in me. I don't know if I should be telling you this, but Miss Wilson and we've been involved. My heart raced. Involved? You mean? He nodded, shame evident in his eyes. It started last semester. At first, it was just extra help with assignments, but then it became more. She implied that my grades would improve if I complied. This was the evidence we needed. Mark, would you be willing to share this information? Anonymously, if necessary? He hesitated, but eventually agreed. If it means stopping her from doing this to others, then yes. With Mark's testimony and the information Elias had gathered, we compiled a comprehensive report detailing Miss Wilson's misconduct. We included dates, specific incidents, and statements from affected students. We decided to submit the report to the university's ethics committee, ensuring it was sent anonymously to protect ourselves and the other students involved. The waiting period that followed was agonizing. Rumors began circulating that Miss Wilson was under investigation, and she was notably absent from lectures. Finally, an official announcement was made. Miss Wilson had been found guilty of violating the university's code of conduct and was terminated from her position. The news spread quickly, and the campus buzzed with discussions about the scandal. Elias and I sat together on a bench, the weight of the past weeks lifting off our shoulders. We did it, I said, a sense of relief washing over me. He smiled, squeezing my hand. Justice served. As we watched students pass by, I realized that while the journey had been tumultuous, it had also been transformative. I had found strength within myself and discovered a true friend in Elias. Together, we had faced adversity and emerged victorious. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. In the aftermath of Miss Wilson's departure, the university atmosphere shifted noticeably. The once tense corridors now buzzed with a renewed sense of optimism and trust. Students felt empowered, knowing that their voices mattered and that justice had been served. For Elias and me, life took on a comforting rhythm. Our bond, forged in adversity, blossomed into a deep and abiding love. We spent countless hours together, exploring the city, sharing dreams, and supporting each other's ambitions. One crisp morning, as autumn leaves painted the campus in hues of gold and crimson, Elias suggested a hike up the nearby hills. The idea was spontaneous, and I welcomed the adventure. As we reached the summit, the panoramic view of the city below took my breath away. The skyline shimmered under the morning sun, and the world felt expansive and full of promise. Elias turned to me, his eyes reflecting the clear blue sky. "Jess, this spot, it's perfect, isn't it?" I nodded, taking in the beauty around us. "It's incredible. Thank you for bringing me here." He took a deep breath, reaching into his backpack. "There's something I've been wanting to give you." From the bag, he produced a small, intricately carved wooden box. Opening it, he revealed a delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like an open book, a symbol of our shared love for literature and the journey we'd undertaken together. "Elias, it's beautiful," I whispered, touched by the thoughtful gesture. He smiled, fastening the necklace around my neck. A token of our story and the many chapters yet to come. As the days turned into weeks, our relationship deepened. We supported each other through academic challenges, celebrated personal victories, and found solace in each other's company during moments of doubt. One evening, while studying in the library, Elias looked up from his notes, a mischievous glint in his eye. "How about a weekend getaway? Just the two of us. A break from all this?" The idea was enticing. "Where to?" "There's a quaint cabin by the lake, a few hours' drive from here. No distractions, just nature and us." The prospect of escaping the hustle and bustle of university life was appealing. "Let's do it." The following weekend, we packed our bags and set off on the adventure. The cabin was charming, nestled amidst towering pines with a serene lake stretching out before it. We spent our days hiking, canoeing, and basking in the tranquility of nature. Evenings were reserved for cozy fireside chats, where we delved into deep conversations about our pasts, dreams, and the future we envisioned together. On our last night, as the stars blanketed the sky, Elias took my hand. "Jess, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I can't imagine a future without you." Tears welled up in my eyes. "I feel the same way, Elias." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a simple yet elegant ring. "I know we're still young, and there's so much ahead of us, but I want to face it all with you. Will you marry me?" Overwhelmed with emotion, I nodded. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Our engagement marked the beginning of a new chapter. We continued our studies, supporting each other's aspirations, and laying the foundation for a shared future. Graduation day arrived, a culmination of years of hard work and perseverance. As we tossed our caps into the air, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and excitement for the journey ahead. We found jobs in the city, Elias as a professor, inspiring young minds, and I as a counselor, helping students navigate their challenges. Our professional lives were fulfilling, but it was the life we built together that brought the most joy. Our wedding was a celebration of love, surrounded by friends and family who had supported us along the way. As we exchanged vows, I reflected on the serendipitous events that had brought us together, the heartbreaks, the challenges, and the unwavering support we'd found in each other. Life, with all its unpredictability, had led me to a place of profound happiness. And as Elias and I embarked on this new journey together, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them hand in hand, ready to write the rest of our story together.